how do you think about Bitcoin as an asset? How do you think about inflation's relationship to the Bitcoin price? Does inflation push Bitcoin's price up? Just talk to me a little bit about the kind of decentralized digital currency and where that fits into this view of the world.
I don't know that it's an inflation hedge, but inflation would definitely be a tailwind. That's for sure. I think that the best argument for having Bitcoin right now has nothing to do with the price direction. I think that the best argument for having Bitcoin, now I'm bullish on the price long term. I've owned Bitcoin for a long time. A lot of people on FinTwit, for some reason, they think I'm a Bitcoin bear. That's not really true. It's just that I've compartmentalized the probabilities of the price of Bitcoin going up and then the probability of Bitcoin becoming global money and replacing all fiat currency. Those are two different sets of probabilities, and people conflate the two. But I think the best reason for having Bitcoin right now is because there is a very real chance that if you value freedom more than you value safety, that you are going to be kicked out of the banking system. You may be kicked out of society. I mean, we see this happening right now, and I won't go into great detail to keep it YouTube friendly. But we see a specific group in our population that are now not allowed into restaurants, or they're not allowed into gyms, and maybe they won't be allowed in grocery stores or on airplanes in the future. So we're getting this segregation of the population. And I think that especially when you start layering on kind of a dehumanizing effect of that group, then I think there's a higher probability than zero that that group gets kind of excommunicated, if you will, from the banking system. And, you know, I was talking to Caitlin Long the other day on my show, and we were talking about, you know, how to buy Bitcoin if you were kicked out of the banking system. She says it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do legally. So that's why I've been telling people, hey, even if you think the price of Bitcoin's going to go in half, who cares? You got to have some just in case you get kicked out of the banking system because you're someone who has a dissenting view or a view that's contrary to the mainstream narrative, and you need to keep some sort of purchasing power with you as a plan B. I think that's the best argument for having it right now. But then I also think there's a fantastic argument for turning people on to Bitcoin as a way to open people's eyes to the risk of tyranny in our society. We see what's happening in Australia. And I think as Americans, that should be a wake-up call, because if that can happen in Australia, it can definitely happen here as well. And so many people on my channel, the one that got taken down yesterday and reinstated, they always say, because I always say at the end of the videos, we got to stand up and fight for freedom, fight for liberty and free market capitalism. And they always say, George, well, how do we do that? How do we do that? We don't have a channel with hundreds of thousands of subscribers. We don't have a big reach like you did. I remind them that I had zero reach back in 2019. But also I say, what you can do is just simple things. Is first, you've got to isolate your friends and family members into 3 different groups. It's just like sales, where you're going to have a third of the group that's going to be receptive to your message. You're going to have a third of the group that will just completely ignore you no matter what you say. You could have a cure for cancer and they won't listen to you. And then you have that third in the middle that may be your average CNN viewer, but may at least have an open mind. And that's the group that you want to focus on. Now, I think the wrong way to do that is just beat them over the head with memes on Facebook as to how they're stupid or why they shouldn't be watching CNN or how Biden sucks or something. I think a better way to do that, a more tactical approach, is to maybe just start sharing some videos like yours, or maybe Ron Paul. I always like to use Ron Paul because he's such a nice guy. And you can tell by just listening to one of his YouTube videos for 5 minutes that he is someone who is principled and trustworthy, even if you don't agree with what he is saying. So I said, start sharing some of those. But then the next thing I tell them is, hey, just introduce them to Bitcoin or introduce them to gold. Right now, I actually like Bitcoin better because unfortunately, the way we're hardwired as human beings is we just want to get rich fast. And I'm sure, so many people, the average Joe and Jane, that really don't understand why Bitcoin is special. They don't understand the philosophy behind it, but they're attracted to it just because they hear it on CNBC every 30 seconds, or they see the price go from, let's say, 40,000 up to 60,000. And like, holy cow, how do I, they kind of get FOMO. But see, that's a great opportunity, because even if that FOMO, which I think is kind of negative, but regardless, if it sinks the hook and it gets them to understand why Bitcoin is interesting from a philosophical standpoint, then they get introduced to Austrian economics. Then they get introduced to the freedom and liberty movement. And see, then what you've done by enticing them by the price of Bitcoin going up is 3 months later, you talk to them, and now all of a sudden they are also standing up for freedom and liberty and fighting this aggressive movement towards tyranny that we have in the United States.